I'm sitting there thinking, okay, if they're going to actually have quantum computing that is infinitely more powerful than what we have our phones and desktops today, and you combine that with artificial intelligence, which is getting stronger every year,
Yep.
how long will it be before we have Skynet or worse?
Welcome to Beyond the Bar podcast. I'm your host, Anisa Tova. And today I have a very special guest, Carl Graham. He's a family law attorney. He's a managing partner of Graham Law located in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Beautiful, beautiful city, actually, where I spent probably 15 years of my life. Now, his background, and I really mean it, is truly anything but ordinary. From growing up overseas, serving in the Army Corps, his journey is definitely more than legal briefs, courtroom, but that's why we're diving in today to learn more about his story. So, Carl, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Denise. It's good to be here.
You know, I really we chatted a little bit, and this is always a great opportunity for me to get to know you and for our viewers and listeners, and really go outside of the bar and the legal title. And you truly do have a fascinating background. So you grew up in some pretty unique places. What was tell us about these places, and what was a teenage life like for an American kid in these international settings?
Well, teenage life was actually pretty straightforward because I lived in the UK at that time. But I started out when I was 8. I moved to Egypt, and I don't want to disclose my age, but that was back in the 1970s. So it was before we had any of the modern conveniences that we take for granted now. There's no VCRs, no fast food. So I went to the American school there, but we basically spent all day, every day outside. It never rained. It was always warm because there's nothing to do inside. There's no PCs, no internet, no nothing. And my dad worked for an oil company, so that's why we lived overseas. After 4 years there, we moved to Norway for a couple of years. And again, I went to the American school in Stavanger. My mother's background was Norwegian, so we actually had a fair number of relatives in the area. And I vaguely learned Norwegian, but I'm not very good with languages despite living overseas. And then after a couple of years there, we moved to the UK, and that was the beginning of the equivalent of high school. And I call it the equivalent because now there was no American school nearby, so my brother and I had to be in the British school system. And so that was quite the culture shock. My parents and I met with the headmaster of the school that I was going to be attending before I started, and he handed me this little calendar, and I'm looking at I'm filling in my class schedule, going through things with them, and I noticed that there was blocks for Saturday, and I assumed it was just kind of a throwback to the some old quaint days or something. But when he finishes Friday, he starts talking about Saturday classes, and I'm like, oh, okay, so this is a real thing. And so, we had school uniforms, Saturday classes, and it wasn't until the first day of school when I showed up and I realized it was actually an all-boys school as well. Nobody had bothered telling me that. So, yeah, England was quite a culture shock, but at least the natives there spoke the same language as me, so I fit in eventually. And I liked it so much I stayed there for undergraduate as well.
That's fascinating. What's one crazy childhood memory that still makes you laugh?
Oh, I'm one that makes me laugh.
See?
Well, no, I'm sitting back chuckling. Unfortunately, childhood was so long. Okay. My best friend from high school was actually my kind of worst enemy my first year at school. My brothers and I were the only Americans at the school, and him and his little cohort of almost like bullies. I mean, not quite. They would make fun of me, call Yankee bastard, go home, things like that. And it's like I didn't even know that guy. Why is he being that way? Well, we were both substandard in French class. At least I had an excuse because I'd never taken French before, and I arrived for what they call middle fifth form, and all of my classmates had had 3 or 4 years of French before that. So I had tutoring. So anyway, because we were both really horrible at French, we got sat at the same double desk as each other a few months after I got there, and we eventually became best friends. And he never stopped apologizing for his kind of bigotry towards Americans at first, and it was an eye opener for him. But it was a little school in Norwich, England. There were other international students, but mainly from former British colonies. So my brother and I were the only Americans, so we kind of did stand out there.
It's really fascinating. Yeah, I lived in China, Beijing, actually, from the age of 8, as I shared, probably till the age of 11-ish. But we had school. I mean, I'm from former Czechoslovakia. Back then, it still was a Czechoslovakia, and so there was a school there up to the 4th grade. And then so we arrived. I couldn't go to the Czechoslovakian school, so we actually had to go to Russian school. And despite what people think, Russian is different than Czech. So that was the first sort of it was a culture shock and a language shock. So here I am learning Russian in China. It's just, but it was great, probably like you, I shared classroom with kids from the Eastern and Central European bloc, and made some lasting friendships. So but that's a great story. You guys were forced to sort of to make it work. I mean, you really didn't have a choice. You were suffering together. So yeah, that is great. Now, Carl, do I remember correctly? Your entire family they were engineers, but you chose law.
Good memory, yes. My parents actually met at Colorado School of Mines in the late 50s. My mother was one of only 4 women at the school at the time. And she never graduated. She was a year or so behind my dad. And when he graduated, he had an Army commitment from ROTC. So they got married and actually moved overseas. My brother was born in Germany on a military installation. But so, yeah, they both have an engineering background. Every member of my family at one point or another actually did attend the Colorado School of Mines. My sister graduated from there. My other 2 brothers started at mines. They both meandered through different paths and ended up getting computer science degrees from the University of Texas at Austin. Me, I was the only one who was not as mathematically inclined. And it caused a little bit of strife. My parents were upset that I wasn't going to be doing a real subject for my degree. They perceived political science to be a Mickey Mouse subject, and they were right. As a precursor to law, it's excellent. As a standalone degree, it's not really that useful.
So then what? What took you to eventually becoming an attorney?
I'm one of these boring ones that knew from a really early age I wanted to be a lawyer.
Hmm.
I don't know if it was seeing them on TV or in movies or just arguing and debate. I've always loved debating.
Hmm.
And my image of a lawyer was, of course, over in Britain, standing with a wig and saying, "My lord," but my image of a lawyer is basically just advocating and arguing. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. I had a second or third cousin or something who was a lawyer, and one summer talked with him a little bit about what it entailed. I was probably 12, 13 at the time, but that was really just to reinforce what I thought I wanted to do already.
And any surprises along the way as you got into the family law?
The fact that I'm in family law is actually quite a surprise. Um, when I was in law school, I didn't take any family law classes, except community property was actually a required class. I went to UCLA for law school, and community property was one of the core classes on the bar exam. So that was required. I didn't take any other classes. I always perceived myself as a criminal attorney. And when I got out, when I graduated from law school, went into the Army JAG Corps, I did primarily prosecution or defense at various times. And then when I became a civilian attorney, I perceived myself doing that, but there wasn't enough criminal law business. So I started doing I got referrals in family law from office mates, and I kind of picked it up accidentally, but I discovered I had a knack for it. And after a couple of years, it kind of dominated my practice, and then I abandoned criminal defense altogether.
You discovered you had a knack for it. In what way? What was it about that, the field
I guess it's a couple of things. First of all, it's a relatively finite area of the law. If you're a corporate attorney, there's thousands of volumes of cases and regulations and statutes you have to refer to. In family law, there's a few discrete sections of the primarily Colorado revised statutes, a few federal laws, but not many. And at any given time, any given year, there's probably about 30 or 40 new cases that come out that impact family law. So once you practice in it for a while, it's fairly easy to master the basics. And then once you master the basics, every year or two, I've got a new issue come up now that I've never dealt with. And I'll have to, scratch my head and actually pull out rule books and find things that I never thought I had to look up that are more obscure, or look at cases from the 60s or 70s that are usually not that relevant these days. But anyway, that's kind of how I found out I had a knack for it. Oh, and I think I compartmentalize fairly well. I don't bring my work home. One of the things when you're dealing in criminal law is you're dealing with pretty horrific fact circumstances sometimes. As a prosecutor, I did a couple of different murder cases, and dealing with the family of in that case, it was in the Army, of a dead soldier killed by fellow soldiers. That is just a horrible experience. There's nothing you can say or do that's going to make their life better. All you can do is give them justice. Or as a defense counsel, where you had no choice on the cases you were assigned, when you're representing somebody accused of, especially like sexual assault on a minor kinds of cases, again, horrible fact patterns. When you're doing your pretrial preparation and you're interviewing, the victim and the victim's family in preparation for trial, they look at you like you're the one who did it yourself because you're representing the person who was charged with it, instead of looking at you like you're an Army officer just doing your job. So moving into family law, there's emotions in family law, but the experience of doing a lot of criminal defense before I moved to family strengthens you to those emotions. It becomes easier to resist getting emotionally caught up in your cases.
That was my follow-up question, actually, dealing with the emotional piece, which is very different. What about dealing with counselor, the opposing counselor who's taking it personally?
I am used to dealing with opposing counsel on a friendly, cordial manner. I've got a picture once from when I was in the Army. I was prosecuting 4 co-accused soldiers for rape, a barracks rape. And nothing funny about that, but they each had detailed military counsel, and there was what's called an Article 32 investigating officer, an independent officer appointed to evaluate the evidence at a preliminary hearing to decide if it should go forward to a court-martial. So there's me, 4 defense counsel, and the Article 32 officers, so a total of 6 of us. That night, 4 of the 6 were actually over at my house playing poker, as well as a few other attorneys. I've also played poker with military judges, full bird colonels, and I was the mere captain at the time. Now, during the day, in the pretrial hearing, emotions got hot and heavy. There's accusations, there's, objection, that's absurd, and he knows it, things.
Yeah.
You don't take a fall for your client, but at the same time, you recognize that you are not your client, and you have to be cordial and professional outside of the hearing. And most of the time, I think in family law, it's the same thing. You can deal with people on hotly contentious cases, but generally speaking, the better attorneys will not sit there and say, your client is evil, therefore you're evil. It does happen at times. Once in a while, I will receive a really vociferous, usually it's an email from an opposing counsel. They don't usually speak like that in person, accusing you or your client of all kinds of evil things. And most of the time it's from less experienced attorneys. And most of the time I essentially chuckle and I just think, okay, they're writing that for the benefit of their client because they don't know any better. So I try not to let that bother me either. I mean, I've had a couple of times where attorneys have sent me nasty accusatory emails. One of only 2 times in my career where an attorney hung up the phone on me, slammed down the phone. 2 days later, that attorney called me up on a completely unrelated case, wanted to pick my brain. I think she had forgotten that she hung up the phone on me.
Yeah.
But,
Yep.
I find that if you just turn the other cheek and realize that even good people can go through emotional times, not just clients, but attorneys, and you don't respond emotionally,
Mm.
overall, the people you are locking horns with early on can end up being pretty good friends later on.
That is true because we're all just human beings having the same sort of fears and concerns, and you don't know what really goes on in their lives. It was interesting since I started doing this podcast, there are a few instances where practitioners would share about a particular struggle they may have overcome, an illness, or maybe something personal. And then the feedback from the local community was, oh, I had no idea. And it sort of shifted a perspective that if that person didn't have a good day in that particular time, and sometimes, like you said, it's not taking that personally. And I think that's a key to so many things. So you mentioned poker. Why poker? What's so attractive about poker? I couldn't
You
let it
know,
go.
I love poker. Back in the 90s, we would do a periodic home game. Back then, it was dealer's choice. It was just a bunch of young lawyers getting together, drinking and playing cards. And we switched over to Texas Hold'em about the same time the rest of the country did when Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker in '03 or '04. I can't remember which. And since then, I now play poker more seriously, but it's still, to me, it's not a profession or anything. I really enjoy it. So I still play in a home game once or twice a month, and I'll go to Las Vegas maybe once a year. And here we have limited stakes gaming, no longer limited stakes actually. We have 3 casino towns in Colorado. One of them, Cripple Creek, is only about an hour or so down the road from us. So I'll go there and play poker periodically as well.
Hmm, interesting.
But I
Where
don't have any insights. Sometimes they'll interview poker players and they'll tell you that, poker is a metaphor for life, or they'll tell you why an engineer makes the best poker player, or a social scientist, or a psychologist, or a lawyer. And I don't have anything pithy that I can use to relate poker to the real world. To me, it's just a pastime that I enjoy.
Yeah, simple as that. That's right. When you mentioned that occasionally you get this angry email, I'm thinking it was probably drafted by AI. Let's talk about AI. So do I recall correctly that are you teaching CLE courses on AI ethics?
I've presented twice on the ethical side of AI. Not a how-to. I think the area is moving far too quickly to really do an effective how-to. For the average CLE, if I'm doing it in November, I'm starting the outline 5 months early in, April or May, 6 months early, I guess. And then the outline has to be handed in a couple months in advance. By the time I actually go to the class, there's already been new developments. So I am not an expert on the use of AI in the law. I do have a commercial account with OpenAI, who do ChatGPT. I have used it as a starting point for mainly experimentation. I will go to either Google Gemini or ChatGPT, and I'll actually say, hey, prepare a direct examination of a CPA who conducted a business valuation of a family dental practice. It'll churn out 2 or 3 pages that are vaguely okay for a starting point. I mean, it's not something you can go to court with, but it might save you 30 minutes to an hour of actually doing some of the initial prep stuff, just going through the basics. So I do think AI has a place. It's funny, I just saw an article this morning about Google has a brand new quantum computer. Now, they've been doing quantum computing for a while, but this one is it's more reliable and faster. And it will solve in 5 minutes something that'll take traditional computers some crazy astronomical pentillion, quadrillion, number of years to solve. Now, it's very specialized. It's not like you can just give it some random problem and it's going to solve it. But I'm sitting there thinking, okay, if they're going to actually have quantum computing that is infinitely more powerful than what we have our phones and desktops today, and you combine that with artificial intelligence, which is getting stronger every year,
Yeah.
how long will it be before we have Skynet or worse?
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's I think my take is if you're using it not for a consumption because you can fall into overconsumption, but if you're using it to enhance a research and to be more productive, just as a tool, it can do wonderful things. Just like with anything else, just in moderation. But for it to take over your life, your practice, where you just sort of sit back, yeah, that's certainly problematic. If you were not practicing law, what career do you think you'd choose?
I would probably either academia and politics, academia and history, which I always loved growing up, or more practically speaking, something to do with computers. Maybe it's the family influence. I've always been very interested in computers. I created my first firm website using HTML, cascading style sheets and all of that. And I actually did my firm website by hand myself
Wow.
until probably 2006 or so, when it was just too much to manage.
You know, you've built quite the expertise in the military law arena, if you will, when it comes to divorce. I remember coming to you with questions about pensions and benefits. You also have a great, you used to write blog. I don't know if you still
I
do.
still do that,
A
yes.
wealth of resources when it comes down to that. That's that I have found that is the area that many practitioners struggle with, and it's quite unique. So earlier on, I mean, you sort of grabbed that, and I know you were sending emails out and had great range of resources in that field that is so needed.
Yeah, especially in this community here in El Paso County, which is where Colorado Springs is. We have several major military installations, a large military community. I also do get calls from attorneys outside of the area with questions on military issues. Just last week, a Canadian attorney called me
Really.
with questions about dividing the military retirement.
Mhm.
And I said, it's hard enough for me to give meaningful advice on somebody calling from outside Colorado, but when you've got a completely foreign legal system, combined with the fact that, of course, the DFAS, Defense Finance and Accounting Service, will not recognize a Canadian court's division or any foreign court's division of military retirement anyway. So with a lot of caveats, I then walked this guy through how we divide military retirements here, so he could then incorporate that into what they're doing out in Canada in his case.
Yeah, that is a great expertise. You've mentored many lawyers. What would you say is the biggest mistakes that new attorneys make?
Either doing too many different things or not asking for help.
Mhm.
I think one of the problems that new attorneys face is they are looking for business and they will hang out their shingle and they'll take cases they're not competent to handle. Either they're family law attorneys and they're taking complex family law cases that take several years to get the expertise for, or worse, they will do family law, criminal defense, bankruptcy, a little bit of disability law. And they'll be a jacks of all trades and they'll practice in every area. And those are the ones that tend to get disciplined and grieved more, but just because they don't know what they're doing. The second part of that, I think, is probably not having a mentor or not listening to people. And I try very hard when I'm dealing with a new attorney on a case to not be patronizing, I guess is one way of putting it. I don't want to be I remember when I was brand new in town and old gray-haired lawyers would essentially tell me, oh, this is what the judge is going to do, but you're brand new, you don't understand that. And I resolved I was never going to be that kind of a lawyer. So when I'm dealing with, an opposing counsel on an issue where I know the answer and they don't, I try to be very careful in how I phrase the answer. I'm like, I'm sure you can probably dig into this a little bit more, but here's a couple of cases to get you started on on why the argument you're making isn't very likely to succeed. And I realize that an opposing counsel telling you that's probably the least welcome person to tell you something like that. But I think the better attorneys are the ones that take that to heart and say, thank you. I've researched this and you're right. The worser ones are the ones who probably painted themselves into a corner with their client by, guaranteeing an outcome they can't deliver, and they will just ignore the precedent and the case law you're sending them and just drive on.
Yeah, and something tells me that you have no problem saying no to the wrong client.
I have a very particular set of clientele. Most of my clients are rational, reasonable, straightforward. And of course, generally they're people of means, just to afford private counsel to begin with. But there is a place for, I've been told I have horrible bedside manner because I am very matter of fact. And when a client comes and wants to unload emotionally with me, I'm not usually a good fit for that kind of a client. Oftentimes, they want to use the legal system to actually essentially get back at their spouse, as opposed to using it to just vindicate their own legal interests and protect their own interests. And so, I just realized I got lost in my train of thought. Your question,
the wrong client
the wrong
who's
client,
overly
yes.
emotional.
Once in a while, somebody will slip through. And, but generally speaking, the clients who are more bitter and wanting to abuse the legal system in certain ways don't usually mix well with me. And even the clients who are emotional, because I will tell them, I'm not your pastor, I'm not your friend, I'm not your, sibling or family member. Yeah. And you don't want to pay me my crazy hourly rate to listen to problems that don't directly involve your case. And so there are attorneys who will do that. I've walked into status conferences before, or settlement conferences, and one time I'll never forget, an attorney said, that was back when we used to do them all live, I just want you to know that, your client cheated on my client and she's very upset by that. And I said, okay, understood, but let's move on and talk about the spreadsheet. And she really just kept pushing that issue. And part of it is that's what her client wanted her to do, but part of it is that's the kind of attorney that she was. And I get along with her on a personal level, not on a case, but when she is on a case, you know that there's going to be personal baggage and accusations coming into the case.
Yeah. No, I think that's the problem. That is a problem, because if you allow the client to unload emotionally, and many practitioners then sort of absorb that, and they become that. And it's hard to really manage expectations on emotional level, because at the end of the day, it's about the economics, and it's about also come up with some rational a parenting plan that will work well to lessen, right, the trauma on the children, allow the family to heal as fast, hopefully, a triage that is possible, and move forward. But what I see, and I haven't really seen it, but moved from Colorado to New York. I have not seen a lot of it in Colorado, but in New York, divorces just drag out for years, and it's almost they're being treated like criminal cases, and many practitioners sort of, they become absorbed in those emotional games, and then it's perpetuated. It's just, so I applaud you for choosing your clients wisely. You probably sleep better at night.
And it's one of the things I have the luxury of doing now after 25 years of private practice that I didn't have the luxury of 20 years ago. So it's easy to say, but now I am more discerning with clients.
Yeah.
I will not tell them what they think, what they want to hear. I'll tell them what they need to hear, and I don't usually embellish or sugarcoat it.
On a final note, how would your kids describe you?
Harsh but fair. Actually, not really harsh. It's not like I spank them or anything. My kids are, I got a 14-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son. They're not going to talk me out of something. If I tell them, you need to come up and go to bed, they need to do it. Whereas my wife, she can be persuaded to be, they can argue back with her and she'll give in a little bit. I don't believe in giving in to terrorism, and terrorism includes teenage kids. But on the other hand, I'm also rational. I mean, if they've got a good reason on something and they can present a reasoned case, I will listen to what they're saying, and I'll incorporate it. But yeah, but I don't lash out. I don't get angry with them or anything like that. So I'm pretty even keeled with them.
Wow, this is great. Carl, I really enjoy this. More than likely we'll have you back. And yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Well, thank you very much. And by the way, I love your skyline behind your window there.
Oh,
Um, on a good day when my blinds are open and there's not sun coming in, you can actually see the mountains through mine, but not the city view that you have.
you know what? I love the mountains. I mean, every time I come to Colorado Springs, which is probably maybe every 3 months, it's just I don't know that you would take it for granted when you're actually there, but it's just so majestic. It's beautiful. Yeah, it's
Uh,
incredible. But yeah, no, so thank you. And to our listeners and viewers, make sure that you check out the links below to learn more about Carl and his work and how to get a hold of him. And do not forget to subscribe to Beyond the Bar podcast channel for more conversations. And until next time, stay curious and stay inspired.